Resident Evil 5 is better than Resident Evil 4. Yeah, I said it. Now before you grab your pitchforks and torches, hear me out. I'm not saying Resident Evil 5 was as generational as 4. Resident Evil 4 literally changed gaming. But story-wise, in terms of lore and payoff, Resident Evil 5 felt like the cinematic climax of everything the series had been building towards since day one. Because here's the thing, to me, Chris, Jill, and Wesker were always the main characters of Resident Evil, while Leon and Claire were more like the supporting cast with their own important but side branch stories. Since the start of the series, Chris Redfield's entire journey had been defined by one name: Albert Wesker. That rivalry started in Spencer's mansion during Resident Evil 1. From the very beginning, Wesker singled Chris out. It wasn't just Umbrella versus Stars, it was personal. You could feel that Wesker absolutely hated Chris's guts. Then came Code Veronica, which gave us one of the most important turning points in the whole series, where Wesker absolutely humiliated Chris, not only overpowering him, but making it crystal clear that Chris wasn't even close to his level. That moment planted a seed of obsession in Chris. He couldn't just let Wesker keep pulling strings from the shadows. He had to become stronger, someone capable of finally ending him. By the time we catch up with Chris in Resident Evil Revelations, you can see the change. He's bulked up and laser focused. The man looks like he's been living in the gym on that juice. His entire arc is about preparing for this moment where he finally faces Wesker again. And it wasn't just Chris. Jill Valentine, who had been with him since the mansion, was just as tied to Wesker's story. That's why her death in Resident Evil 5 hit so hard at the time, because Jill wasn't just another side character, she was the female protagonist of the series. And Wesker himself, he wasn't just a villain, he was the villain, the face of Umbrella Corporation. So when Resident Evil 5 gave us the ultimate showdown, Chris, Jill, and Wesker, it didn't just feel like another entry in the series, it felt like the culmination to a decade-long saga. And in my opinion, Resident Evil 5 delivered. The chaos, the action, the massive set pieces, it felt like the Avengers Endgame of Resident Evil, a true finale to the story that had been building up since the Spencer mansion. The showdown with Wesker is still one of the most cinematic moments in Resident Evil history. And there's also gameplay innovations. Resident Evil 5 introduced co-op to the mainline series. For the first time, you could share the horror with a friend, which was a game changer. And let's talk about Sheva Alomar, because compared to Ashley Graham in Resident Evil 4, Sheva was a massive upgrade. Sheva could fight, hold her own, and she felt like a true partner. Ashley, bless her heart, spent most of the time in Resident Evil 4 hiding in dumpsters and yelling "Leon!" for every 2 minutes. Now don't get me wrong, I know why people still say Resident Evil 4 is better. The setting is phenomenal. The village, the castle, the island, each area feels distinct and unique. The villagers are genuinely terrifying, and of course Leon Kennedy is at his most iconic, dropping one-liners while kicking down doors and doing spinning kicks. Resident Evil 4 is revolutionary, no doubt about it. But here's the thing, Resident Evil 4, as great as it was, always felt more like a side story to me. Leon's mission in Spain was basically a standalone adventure for him, where he's just fighting a cult, saving the president's daughter, that had little to do with the Umbrella storyline that we had been following since Resident Evil 1. Now yeah, Ada does show up and Wesker's name is in the mix, but let's be real, neither of them drive the main plot. Ada's role is mostly hidden in side missions and in the Separate Ways DLC, and Wesker doesn't do much beyond lurking in the background and trying to get his hands on Las Plagas. Like, they're there, but it feels more like a setup for the future rather than being tied to the core of Resident Evil 4's story. By contrast, Resident Evil 5 was a total opposite. It was an all-in-one Umbrella saga. Jill's shocking disappearance, Chris's obsession with finally putting an end to Wesker, and the final downfall of Umbrella's most iconic villain. It felt like the true ending of the Resident Evil story, the payoff that we had been waiting for years. And if you really think about it, almost everyone in Resident Evil had a clear mission that was tied to the lore. Chris and Jill were dead set on stopping Wesker once and for all. Claire had joined TerraSave, an anti-bioterrorism group, which made sense given her experiences in Raccoon City and Rockford Island. But then there's Leon. In Resident Evil 2, he's his rookie cop who just happened to survive the nightmare of Raccoon City. Then out of nowhere in Resident Evil 4, he's saving the president's daughter in Spain like some kind of secret agent. It was jarring, and honestly kind of shallow compared to the arcs that everyone else was on. It felt like Capcom just threw him into a cool new role without fully explaining how he got from point A to point B. Now credit where credit is due. The Resident Evil 4 remake actually fixed this. The added cutscene showing Leon's training and how the government basically forced him into this role bridged the gap between Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 in a way that the original never did. I really commend Capcom for fleshing Leon's story out here, but at the time, back in 2005, Leon's story just didn't feel as rooted into the core of Resident Evil saga as Chris, Jill, and Wesker. And by no means was Resident Evil 5 perfect. The Jill brainwashing subplot was corny as hell, the side villains didn't have much depth, Sheva's character wasn't fleshed out as much as she could have been, similar to how Carlos felt in Resident Evil 3, and yes, Chris punching a boulder is still one of the dumbest yet funniest moments in video game history. But for all those flaws, Resident Evil 5 still delivers something Resident Evil 4 never did: closure. And that's why I think Resident Evil 5 deserves more respect than it gets. Resident Evil 4 might be the revolutionary classic, but Resident Evil 5 was a cinematic classic. It brought the years of story threads together, gave fans the ultimate Chris vs. Wesker showdown, and showed us that Resident Evil could be just as much about action spectacle as survivor horror. So yeah, Resident Evil 5 is better than 4. I just wanted to make this video because I've seen people praise Resident Evil 4 endlessly, but barely anyone gives Resident Evil 5 credit for being as important as it was. Let's criticize its flaws, sure, but let's also give it the respect it deserves for closing a massive chapter in Resident Evil's history. But what about me? Get back in your cage, you filthy animal. That's pretty much all, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you're new to my content and like horror games. Follow me on Twitch for when I go live, and don't forget to like and comment. I've been VanquishedKira.